Crystals held special meaning for prehistoric Stone Age cultures, more than we might have ever realized. Nearly every archaeological site I explore reveals ancient artifacts crafted from clear crystal. But here's the mystery. We rarely find large crystal relics, only very small ones. And today, I'm on a quest to find out why. I'm on a mission to solve this puzzle, because unlocking its secrets could reveal something amazing about ancient people that we never knew before. To figure this out, I'm diving deep into why this clear stone was so important to these prehistoric cultures, to learn the reason they almost always used only small objects of crystal. So the first thing I looked at is, how does quartz crystal compare as a stone tool type with all the other types of stones native cultures used? When ancient people needed stone to make tools from, they basically just looked for two types of stone. Stone that they would grind into the shapes of the objects they were making, and stone that they would remove chips or flakes from to form the object into its intended shape. And the difference between these two types of stone and what artifacts can be made from them all comes down to how the stone was originally formed in nature geologically. Most of the rocks found on Earth contain silicon dioxide, also known as silica, which is a compound of the elements silicon and oxygen. Stones that have low levels of silica and large silica grains are often made into tools by grinding the rock into the tool shape. This is because the structure of these rock types, like granite and other similar rocks, mostly only allow it to be formed into tools by grinding it. These tend to be for more larger and heavier duty objects. We call them ground stone artifacts, such as woodworking tools like axes, adzes, and gouges, or for decorative ornate items like gorget pendants. Quartz crystal, however, falls into the other category of stone tool types. These rock types have high amounts of silica with fine silica grains, and the way that stone tools are made from them is not by grinding, but by flaking or chipping. These are rocks like flint, jasper, obsidian, and others. Their structure allows them to be shaped into a predictable form by chipping their edges and removing flakes to reduce the tool being made in thickness. This process is called flint knapping. These types of rocks also create razor-sharp edges during this process, and is why ancient cultures used these kinds of rock types to make their spearheads, arrowheads, knives, scrapers, blades, and other similar kinds of artifact types from. Each of these types of rock occur in various grades, and some lower grades were used by prehistoric cultures, like these large-grained and low silica level quartzite and rhyolite. You can visibly see the large silica grains, like grains of sand. These cultures used these low-grade stones to make tools from because they had to, and not every area where these cultures lived naturally had high-grade stone to make tools from. So they had to use what was available to them. The larger the grain size, the less sharp the tool can be made into. Also, the more difficult it is to make stone tools from lower grade types of stone. And out of all of these stone tool types, quartz crystal is of exceptional quality and a very high grade type of stone to make tools from. But the quality of the crystal is just the start of its importance to prehistoric cultures. If there's one thing that hasn't changed in thousands and thousands of years, is that people love beautifully colored stones. This modern ring is set with a green emerald, and 13,000 years ago, the Clovis culture made this end scraper artifact out of a brilliant rare green flint. But perhaps no other stone is as highly prized as the diamond, the rarity of it being a rock that is clear, much like the quartz crystal is. Native cultures were very in tune with their environment, and they loved beautiful stones. It's evident from the archaeological sites that I work on. I find many artifacts made from beautiful stones, such as this green flint and yellow jasper. The ancient cultures that I study would also put the yellow jasper under their campfires to do what's called heat treating, and that changes the color from yellow to red. Sometimes it would partially heat treat the object, and the artifact would end up being both yellow and red. Much of the flint from this area are dull colors, such as black, brown, and gray. And even though these ancient people did of course use those colors to make artifacts from, the fact that they sought out rarer, more beautifully colored stones from other areas tells me that stone color was important to them. Colors have symbolism with cultures. Whereas green is symbolic of life, white often represents purity. But what about clear? The color of crystals, or more specifically lack of color, likely holds a much deeper meaning. Being able to see through the stone represents clarity for indigenous people to be able to have a deeper form of connection with their spiritual environment. This is why crystals were often used ceremonially. A clear rock, a clear stone, almost doesn't make sense. How can a rock be clear? Of course, we now know geologically how that can occur. However, in ancient times, clear rocks such as crystal were probably thought of as something supernatural. But what I don't understand is if crystals were so important to these ancient people, then why were they making such small objects from it? I mean, you would think that if something was very important to them, then they would want to make large objects from it, not small ones. So why is that? This then led me to look at the artifact types. Maybe there are clues in what they were making out of crystal that will help us answer this question. These crystal artifacts are so small that they almost physically couldn't be made any smaller and still be functional. So when I looked at the types of artifacts made out of crystal, I found small spearheads, such as this Rossville spearhead that was thrown from an Atlatl spear thrower, tiny arrowheads, and scrapers. There is a big clue here with the scrapers that we're going to use later on to solve this. This is the first of two big clues. And here's the second big clue. But why were the same types of artifacts that these cultures made out of flint often very large, but the ones they made out of crystal very small? Now that we understand the artifact types that were being made from crystal, next I looked at what cultural time periods were making these artifacts. Maybe only certain cultures were using crystal, and that might lead to figuring this out. This crystal end scraper is from one of the Clovis culture sites that I've worked on, and is one of the earliest known cultures from the Americas, which date to about 13,000 years ago, during the early Paleocultural time period. However, this crystal Lamoka culture spearhead is from about 4,000 years ago, and this crystal Madison culture arrowhead is about 300 years old. So now we see that prehistoric cultures were using crystal in this region from at least 13,000 years ago to about 300 years ago. So if all of the major cultural time periods were using crystals, how rare do crystals naturally occur geologically in the region of northeastern North America where I do my research? Maybe there are clues to be found in how rare crystals are. In more than 20 years of being an archaeologist studying prehistoric stone tool sources, quarries, and ancient mines in this region, I've discovered several crystal sources, one of them being a crystal cave. But whether or not these cultures used this crystal cave remains to be established. I have found crystal sources that were used during prehistoric times, but most of the stone tool sources in this region are flint, and crystal sources are rather rare. So when we see an uncommon type of stone, such as crystal, commonly occur in archaeological sites, that tells me that crystals were very important to these ancient people and that they purposely looked for sources of it. When ancient people made stone tools, the size of the tools was limited by the size of the stones they had available. Most flint in this region occurs in large natural blocks and can be turned into large artifacts. Even though some larger crystals occur that could be turned into larger crystal artifacts, most pieces of crystal around here are small. So small, they are locally referred to as Herkimer diamonds. Crystals were very important to these ancient cultures, And when they found pieces of crystal, they wanted to make something from it. But since it was hard for them to find large rocks of crystal, they were forced to make small spearheads, small arrowheads. And what's one of the smallest types of stone tools that these cultures used on a daily basis? End scrapers. They're usually not big, which is why that's the type of small artifact most crystal was turned into. Earlier in the video, we discussed how Stone Age artifacts were made. But these types of stone only occur in certain places. So watch this video next, so you can see a source of stone ancient cultures used for more than 13,000 years.